Welcome in, everyone. Grab a seat. Imagine, just for a moment, that we're sitting together right here by a fire in a quiet retreat lodge. We are far away from the pings, the emails, and that constant heavy urgency of your daily work. Today in this explainer, we're taking a really intimate look at what actually happens to our internal foundation when the professional winds start howling.
To kind of ground us before we dive in, the source material points to the truly remarkable story of Nelson Mandela. And what really stands out here isn't his political strategy or his eventual presidency. No, it's his moral steadiness under extreme pressure. Think about it. During those incredibly painful, volatile negotiations to end apartheid, Mandela could have so easily let bitterness or reactivity dictate his direction. But instead, he modeled this calm, incredibly disciplined steadiness. His sheer presence literally created a container for dignity in a room that was just charged with pain. He wasn't just reacting to the chaos, he was bringing a deeply integrated, steady self right into the moment.
So I want to ask you something, and I just want you to sit with it for a second. When tension flares up in your team, or say a high-stakes decision suddenly goes sideways, are you responding to what is actually happening in this exact moment? Or are you responding to something older within you, maybe a past failure, an unacknowledged fear, or even just a deep-seated need for control? This is that quiet coaching question we just have to keep asking ourselves if we want to lead from clarity rather than pure reflex.
Because here is a quiet and, honestly, sometimes uncomfortable truth about these high-stakes moments. Pressure reveals. It does not create. We so often think that a sudden crisis makes us act out of character. But the gentle truth is that times of immense strain don't build our inner condition, they simply expose the foundation that is already sitting right there. If you've been carrying around a bunch of unexamined stress, well, pressure is absolutely going to bring it to the surface. Pressure is, really, just an audit of what we've already built inside.
Let's picture your leadership like a giant tree. The branches, the leaves, that's your outer world, right? That's your strategy, your public speaking skills, your quarterly goals, the stuff everyone sees. But beneath the soil, completely out of sight, is this complex network of roots. Those roots are your self-awareness, your emotional regulation, your inner congruence. And when the really fierce winds of pressure start blowing, it is the depth of those unseen roots that provides the emotional steadiness to hold tension without just collapsing. If the roots are shallow, the tree falls. It's that simple.
And what happens when those roots are shallow? Well, our internal strain doesn't stay private for long. In fact, your internal reality very quickly becomes your team's external atmosphere. Notice how stress becomes tone. Have you ever thought about that? You might think you're just answering an email super quickly, but your team? They feel the sharpness. And fear becomes pace. When you are internally anxious, you naturally start rushing your team, basically forcing urgency where discernment is what's actually needed. Your internal overload literally transforms into your communication style.
So the next time you feel that internal engine really revving up, I want you to ask yourself, are we seeking wisdom right now, or are we just looking for relief? It's such a profound distinction, because when discomfort feels absolutely intolerable, our basic human instinct is to make literally any decision just to make the tension stop. But relief? Relief is definitely not the same thing as wisdom.
And this leads us right into the traps we all stumble into when the heat gets turned up. It's almost predictable how fast our brains try to escape discomfort. Fear jumps in and rushes a resolution before clarity even has time to form. Overload causes us to simplify really complex human issues just to get them off our desk. We fall right into people-pleasing, trying to preserve approval at the cost of the actual truth. And, well, my personal favorite trap, urgency masquerading as wisdom. Making a lightning-fast decision feels like strong leadership, doesn't it? But if it's driven entirely by anxiety, it's really just a reaction dressed up as an action plan.
This is exactly where we find a really profound distinction in the material, the fundamental difference between analysis and discernment. See, analysis is gathering all the facts, looking at the spreadsheets, seeing what logically can be done. It's highly cognitive. But discernment is the ability to perceive what matters most beneath all that surface noise. It's pausing to ask, what is actually wise here? What is deeply true? Discernment demands presence, because you literally have to slow down enough to hear the answer.
So how do we actually build this? The authors remind us of something really important. Everyday leadership is built to repeated relational encounters, not just dramatic moments alone. We don't magically become a steady rock in a crisis if we haven't actively practiced steadiness on a random, boring Tuesday morning. It's in the quiet, everyday rhythms. How you enter a meeting room, how you handle a tiny disappointment, how you actually listen when a colleague is struggling. That, right there, is where presence is truly forged. Okay, let's slow things right down. We're going to walk through a very specific, 4-step practice for leading with that steadiness when the pressure spikes. I really encourage you to internalize this sequence. It's incredibly simple, but I promise you it requires deep intention. Let's walk through it together. Step 1 is to simply pause. Pause before reacting. When a crisis hits, your instinct is going to scream at you to move faster, to fix it instantly, right? But presence introduces a completely different rhythm. It asks you to take one deliberate breath, to carve out just a tiny sliver of space between the stimulus and your response. And in that pause, you ask one single question. What is actually needed here? Not what do I want to do to fix my own anxiety, but what does this situation actually require of me? Step 2, right inside that pause, is to notice your internal activation. Before you even open your mouth, gently observe your own emotional state. Is your chest feeling tight? Are you suddenly feeling really defensive? Are you embarrassed by a mistake and kind of wanting to deflect the blame? Just notice what you are carrying. Honestly, this is the deepest form of responsibility. Because if you don't notice it, your team will essentially be forced to blindly absorb your unacknowledged anxiety. Third step is to regulate before you speak. And to be clear, regulation absolutely does not mean becoming some emotionless robot. It doesn't mean suppressing your feelings at all. It actually means stewarding them. It means you can feel the heavy weight of a moment without letting that strain just automatically take over the entire room. You acknowledge what's hard, yes, but you completely refuse to turn your internal strain into a burden for everyone else to carry. And finally, step 4, communicate with intentionality. Only now do you move outward. You offer your team complete honesty without throwing them into unnecessary alarm. You acknowledge the reality of the situation, even if it's grim, but you do it from a grounded, steady center. This kind of communication powerfully teaches your team that difficulty does not ever have to destroy dignity. You know, this whole 4-step practice, it's really built on what we call habits of return. Taking a breath right before you open that Zoom room. Taking a tiny pause before you hit reply on a super frustrating email. Doing a quick internal check-in right after a really tough conversation. These aren't massive, life-altering overhauls. They are simple, repeated returns that just keep you connected to your humanity amidst some very heavy responsibilities.
But let's get real for a second by the fire here. What happens if we just don't do this? We've all had those days, right? Days where we were physically in the room, sure. But emotionally, we were completely absent, guarded, reactive. So what is the true cost of our absence? What actually happens to the climate of a team when grounded presence just goes missing?
The source material points to a rather sobering reality here, and it's that the cost of absence is steep. When you, as a leader, are emotionally unpredictable, you are literally training your people into guardedness. You are teaching them, day by day, that it is just not safe to bring you the truth. You end up fostering self-silencing. You create relational fear. And this is exactly why cultivating presence isn't just some nice self-care add-on. It is the moral weight of leadership. For better or worse, you are always leaving something behind in the nervous systems of the people you lead. But here's the really beautiful flip side to that stark reality. Presence actually teaches culture through conduct. When you actively model emotional steadiness, when you give people quality listening, when you take that pause before responding, you are organically teaching a culture. You are showing them, without writing a single corporate memo, that safety, clarity, and maturity are the true standards around here. You are literally demonstrating the exact environment you are inviting them to build with you. So as we kind of wind down our time together, I want you to think about the legacy of your presence. Because the atmosphere you create, it completely outlives your tenure. It leaves a lasting imprint on human memory. People will absolutely remember if they felt steadied or unsettled in your presence. It leads to cultural reproduction. Your team will internalize your specific model of mature leadership, and they'll carry it forward. And it results in durable formation. The real legacy question we all have to answer is, what did people become more capable of simply because they were led by you? Which brings us to a final thought I just want to let settle in. Leadership is never only about the work completed. It is also about the kind of humanity that was strengthened along the way. So as you leave this quiet fireside space today and head back out into the noise and the pressure of your daily work, I invite you to carry that truth with you. The question I'll leave you with is this. When the winds inevitably howl tomorrow, who will your team become just because you chose to stay rooted? Thank you so much for taking this time for yourself and for the people you lead.